The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Silverhorn, Arizona Territory, 1875, shattering the early morning silence like a hammer on glass. Emma Lawson dropped her water bucket, the precious liquid spilling across the parched ground as she whirled toward the distant sound that had come from the direction of her family's small ranch. Fear seized her heart. Her brother Daniel had ridden out at dawn to check on their cattle, and he wasn't one to waste ammunition on trivial matters. Emma gathered her skirts and ran, her boots kicking up dust as she raced toward the family homestead. At 22, she had already endured more hardship than most, twice her age, losing both parents to fever 2 years prior, leaving her and 19-year-old Daniel to maintain the struggling ranch alone. They only had each other now, and the thought of losing him sent cold terror through her veins. As she crested the small rise that overlooked their modest ranch house, Emma froze. 3 horses were tied at the front post, none she recognized, and the door hung open. Another shot rang out, this time from inside the house, followed by a man's pained cry that she immediately recognized as Daniel's. "No," Emma whispered, dropping instinctively to a crouch behind a juniper bush. Her mind raced, calculating the terrible odds. Daniel was in trouble, possibly wounded, and at least 3 men were inside their home. She had no weapon, no horse, and the nearest neighbor was old Mr. Peterson, 2 miles east. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her press lower to the ground. A lone rider approached from the west, his silhouette cutting a stark figure against the rising sun. Emma held her breath as the stranger slowed his horse to a walk, clearly having heard the commotion as well. He dismounted smoothly, tethering his mount behind a stand of cottonwoods out of sight of the ranch house. Emma observed the man with careful scrutiny. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to danger. His dark brown hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but she caught the glint of determination in his eyes as he drew a revolver from his holster and checked its chambers. A second gun rested on his opposite hip, and a rifle was secured to his saddle. Before she could decide whether this stranger represented another threat or potential salvation, a shout came from the house. "We know you're holding out, Lawson. Tell us where the money is or we'll put another bullet in you." The voice was coarse and threatening. "I told you," Daniel's voice was strained with pain. "There's nothing here, just the cattle and the land." A sharp crack followed the sound of someone being struck, and Daniel groaned. Emma bit her lip to keep from crying out, tears threatening to spill. The stranger's head turned in her direction, his sharp eyes spotting her hiding place. Emma froze, prepared to flee, when he held up a cautioning hand and moved toward her in a crouch, staying low behind the scrub brush. "Madam," he whispered when he reached her, his voice a deep, gentle rumble. "I take it that's your kin in there?" Emma nodded, studying him properly now. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but handsome, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble. Dark hair curled slightly beneath his hat, and his eyes were a striking blue that reminded her of the summer sky. He wasn't much older than herself, perhaps 26 or 27. "My brother Daniel," she whispered. "I don't know who those men are or what they want. We don't have any money." 3 men inside, he confirmed. "At least, I saw 3 horses." He nodded thoughtfully. "I'm Damon Quinn. Used to ride with the law up in Colorado Territory. Been tracking these men for 2 weeks. They've hit 3 other homesteads looking for cash, valuables. They don't leave witnesses." Emma's blood ran cold. "Please," she whispered urgently, "my brother's all I have left." Something in Damon's expression softened. "I'll get him out, miss." "Emma Lawson, Miss Lawson," he said with a slight nod. "I need you to stay here out of sight. If shooting starts, get lower. When it's over, if you hear me call clear, you can come in. Otherwise, you ride for help. Can you handle that?" Emma wanted to argue, wanted to help somehow, but knew she would only be a liability in a gunfight. "Yes." Damon reached into his boot and pulled out a small derringer, handing it to her. "Just in case, 2 shots. Point and pull if anyone comes for you who isn't me or your brother." The pistol was surprisingly heavy in her hand. Emma had fired a rifle before, but never a handgun. She nodded solemnly, accepting both the weapon and the responsibility. "I'll bring him out," Damon promised, and something in his steady gaze made her believe him. She watched as he moved like a shadow toward the house, staying low and using what little cover the sparse landscape provided. The morning sun illuminated the dust motes swirling in his wake as he disappeared around the side of the building. Inside the house, Emma could hear muffled voices growing more agitated. One of the men shouted something unintelligible, followed by the sound of furniture being overturned. She gripped the derringer tighter, praying for Daniel's safety, and for the brave stranger who had stepped into their troubles without hesitation. Minutes stretched like hours as Emma waited, every muscle tense with anticipation. Then it happened: a single gunshot, followed by a rapid succession of 3 more, the sound of breaking glass. A man's scream, more gunfire, so close together she couldn't count the shots. Emma pressed herself flat against the earth, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The derringer trembled in her white-knuckled grip as silence fell abruptly across the homestead, then footsteps on the porch. Emma raised the small pistol, aiming at the doorway with shaking hands. A figure emerged, silhouetted against the morning light, a tall man supporting another who limped heavily. It took her a moment to recognize Damon, with Daniel's arm draped over his shoulders, half carrying her brother from the house. "Clear." Damon called, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. Emma scrambled to her feet, tucking the derringer into her pocket as she ran toward them. Daniel's face was ashen, blood soaking through his pant leg just above the knee. A bruise was forming on his cheekbone and his lip was split, but he was alive, wonderfully, miraculously alive. "Emma," Daniel breathed as she reached them, relief washing over his battered features. "Let's get him inside," Damon said grimly. "He needs tending." "The men?" Emma asked as they maneuvered Daniel toward the house. "Won't be troubling anyone else," Damon replied, his expression hardening momentarily. "I'll take care of them after we see to your brother." Emma steeled herself as they entered the house. The front room was in disarray, furniture overturned, a shelf of books scattered across the floor. 2 bodies lay still near the kitchen doorway, but Damon steered her away from them, toward the small bedroom she shared with Daniel. They settled Daniel on the bed, and Emma immediately set to work, cutting away his blood-soaked pant leg to reveal a bullet wound that had torn through the flesh of his thigh. "It went clean through," Damon observed, examining the wound with practiced eyes. "No bone hit from the look of it." "He's lucky." "Lucky," Daniel repeated with a weak laugh that ended in a grimace. "That's one word for it. They were waiting when I came back from checking the herd, said they'd heard rumors about gold from the old mine on our property." Emma shook her head as she gathered clean cloths and a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet beside the bed. "That mine's been dry for 20 years. Father always said it barely yielded enough to buy this land before it played out." "They wouldn't believe me," Daniel winced as Emma began cleaning the wound. "Said they'd heard stories in town about the Lawson fortune. I told them the only fortune we have is each other and 50 head of skinny cattle." Damon's expression grew thoughtful. "Sounds like someone's been spreading tales. These men have been working their way through homesteads from Prescott to here, always looking for supposed caches of money or gold that don't exist." While Emma bandaged Daniel's leg, Damon excused himself to take care of matters outside. She knew what that meant: the grim task of dealing with the dead. She focused on her brother instead, giving him laudanum for the pain once the wound was cleaned and dressed. When Damon returned an hour later, his shirt was damp from exertion, but the evidence of violence had been removed from her home. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom, hat in hand. "I've buried them out past your north fence," he said quietly. "Took their horses to your corral. You can sell them in town when you're able, might fetch a decent price to help with the ranch." Emma looked up at him, gratitude welling in her chest. "You didn't have to do that. You've already done so much." Damon shifted slightly, seeming almost uncomfortable with her thanks. "It's what needed doing, madam." Daniel, drowsy from the medication but still alert, studied the man who had saved his life. "You said you were tracking them." "A bounty hunter." "Former lawman," Damon corrected. "Sheriff in a small mining town called Silvercliff up Colorado Way. These men robbed and killed a family, they're friends of mine. The law couldn't spare men to chase them across territories, so I resigned my badge and took up the trail. Will you go back now?" Emma asked, surprised by how much she hoped the answer would be no. Damon's blue eyes met hers, and something passed between them, a spark of connection neither had anticipated. "Not right away," he said finally. "Seems to me you two could use an extra hand around here while your brother heals." And so Damon Quinn stayed, sleeping in the small barn and helping Emma with the ranch work that Daniel couldn't manage. Days passed, turning into weeks as Daniel's wound slowly healed. Emma found herself watching Damon as he worked the way the muscles in his arms flexed when he chopped wood. How gentle his hands were when tending to a newborn calf, the quiet competence with which he approached every task. He spoke little of his past, but in the evenings, sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, he would sometimes share stories. He told them of growing up in Kansas, of losing his parents to a tornado when he was 16, of drifting west and finding purpose in a tin star pinned to his chest. "Why did you really give up your badge?" Emma asked one evening as Daniel dozed in his chair beside them. Surely it wasn't just to chase those men. Damon was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was softer than usual. There was a family, the Hendersons, Thomas and Sarah, their little girl Lily. Thomas was the town blacksmith Sarah taught at the schoolhouse. Good people. Those men came through town, robbed the bank. Thomas tried to stop them, and they shot him down in the street. He paused, staring out at the darkening landscape. They weren't satisfied with the bank money. Heard rumors that the blacksmith had a stash of gold from a wealthy mine owner who'd paid him for special work. They went to the Henderson home that night, by the time I got there. His voice trailed off, and his hands tightened on the arms of his chair. Emma reached out instinctively, placing her hand over his. "You don't have to tell me. Sarah and Lily were dead," he continued quietly. "The house was torn apart, just like they tried to do here, and I promised myself I'd find them no matter how far they ran." "And you did," Emma said, her fingers still resting lightly on his. Damon looked down at their hands, then slowly turned his palm up, taking her fingers in his. "I did." From that night forward, something changed between them. Small touches his hand at the small of her back as he helped her over a fence, her fingers brushing his as she passed him a cup of coffee, shoulders touching as they sat side by side mending tack in comfortable silence. Spring bloomed across the Arizona landscape, painting the desert with unexpected color. Daniel grew stronger, first moving about with a crutch, then with only a pronounced limp that the doctor in town assured would lessen with time. "You don't need to stay on our account anymore," Daniel told Damon one morning as they inspected a broken wheel on the wagon. "I can manage the heavy work now." Damon paused, a strange expression crossing his face. "You asking me to leave?" "No," Daniel replied with a knowing smile. "Just making sure you know you're welcome to stay, permanently if you've a mind to." That evening, Damon found Emma alone by the small creek that cut through the eastern edge of their property. She sat on a large, flat rock, skirts spread around her, watching the water flow over smooth stones. The setting sun caught in her honey-brown hair, creating a halo effect that made his breath catch. "Your brother thinks I should stay," Damon said without preamble as he approached. Emma looked up, her green eyes reflecting both hope and wariness. "And what do you think?" He sat beside her on the rock, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I think I haven't felt at home anywhere since I was 16 years old. Until now," Emma's heart quickened. "And what would you do if you stayed? Go back to being a lawman?" "No," he said firmly. "I've had enough of chasing men who choose to do evil. I'd rather build something good." He hesitated, then added, "With you, if you'd allow it." The directness of his statement caught Emma by surprise. There had been no formal courtship, no declarations of ardent feeling, just the steady building of trust and affection through shared work and quiet evenings. "Are you asking to court me, Damon Quinn?" she asked, a smile tugging at her lips. "I reckon I am," he replied, the hint of a grin softening his usually serious expression. "Though I admit I'm a bit out of practice with such matters." Emma laughed softly. "I wouldn't know if you were. It's not as if I've had many suitors out here." "Then we'll learn together," he said, tentatively reaching for her hand. When she didn't pull away, he entwined his fingers with hers, and they sat in contented silence as the sunset painted the sky in magnificent shades of gold and crimson. The courtship that followed was as unconventional as their meeting had been. There were no fancy dinners or theater outings. Such luxuries didn't exist in their corner of the territory. Instead, they built their relationship through shared purpose and growing understanding. Damon taught Emma to shoot his revolver properly, not just the small derringer. She showed him how to make her mother's bread, laughing at his flour-covered attempts. In the evenings, they would often sit on the porch, Daniel tactfully retiring early to give them privacy. Sometimes they talked for hours, sharing hopes and fears. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, Emma working on mending while Damon whittled small wooden animals that began to populate the mantelpiece. "I never thanked you properly," Emma said one evening in late spring, "for riding into that gunfight and saving Daniel." Damon looked up from the small wooden horse taking shape in his hands. "You've thanked me plenty with food and shelter and," he hesitated, "companionship." "It was the bravest thing I've ever seen," she continued. "You could have waited for the marshal, gathered a posse. Instead, you faced them alone." "Not entirely selfless," he admitted. "I'd been hunting them for weeks, but seeing you there so frightened for your brother." He set down his carving knife. "I couldn't bear the thought of you losing him." Emma studied his face in the fading light. "When did you know you wanted to stay?" "The moment you didn't flinch when I handed you that derringer," he said without hesitation. "Most women I've known would have recoiled from the weapon, or at least handled it like it might bite. You took it like a tool you hoped not to use but were prepared to if necessary. That's when I knew you were different." Emma laughed softly. "And here I thought it might have been my cooking or my sparkling conversation." "Those didn't hurt," Damon replied with a smile. Then more seriously, "When did you know you wanted me to stay?" Emma considered the question. "The third night you were here. Daniel had a fever from the wound. You stayed up all night with me, keeping watch, changing the cold compresses on his forehead. You sang to him when he was delirious that old trail song about coming home. Your voice was terrible," she added with a teasing smile, "but your heart wasn't." Damon laughed, a rich sound that still surprised her sometimes. He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "Emma Lawson, I think I might be falling in love with you." The simple, honest declaration hung in the air between them. Emma felt a flush of warmth spread through her chest. "I think I might be falling in love with you too, Damon Quinn." His kiss, when it came, was gentle and questioning at first, then deepening as she responded. His hands cradled her face as if she were made of precious porcelain, and hers found their way to his shoulders, solid and reassuring beneath her touch. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Damon rested his forehead against hers. "I should speak to your brother," he murmured. "Daniel already considers you family," Emma replied. "But yes, he'd appreciate the gesture." The following day, Damon found Daniel alone in the barn, working on repairing a saddle. The younger man looked up as Damon entered, a knowing smile already playing on his lips. "Let me guess," Daniel said before Damon could speak, "you're here to ask for my blessing to marry my sister." Damon paused, then let out a short laugh. "Am I that transparent?" "Only to those paying attention," Daniel replied, setting aside his work. "And I've been paying attention to how you look at Emma since about the second week you were here." "And you have no objections?" Damon asked, suddenly feeling strangely nervous despite Daniel's obvious acceptance. Daniel stood, wincing slightly at the stiffness in his healing leg, and extended his hand. "My sister deserves happiness, and for whatever reason you seem to provide that. Besides," he added with a grin, "it'll be nice having another man around to help with the heavy lifting." Damon clasped his hand firmly. "Thank you, I promise I'll do right by her, by both of you." "I know you will," Daniel replied seriously. "Otherwise, I'd have run you off weeks ago, bum leg or not." That evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, Damon took Emma to the creek where they had first acknowledged their feelings. He had spent the afternoon in town, returning with a small package that he now drew from his pocket. "It's not much," he said as they sat on their rock by the water. "And if you want something finer later, when the ranch is doing better, I'll get it for you. But for now." He opened the small box to reveal a simple silver band with a tiny blue stone set in the center. It was all the general store had, but the color reminded me of the wildflowers that grow by the creek. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the ring. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Emma Lawson," Damon said, taking her hand. "When I rode into that gunfight to save your brother, I had no idea I was riding toward my future. You've given me a home and a purpose beyond revenge. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she said simply, her smile radiant even through her tears. "Yes, I will." The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit that seemed somehow symbolic of how Damon had fit so seamlessly into their lives. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the small community. Neighbors who had kept their distance after Emma and Daniel's parents died now came calling, bearing gifts and well wishes. The ranch, which had felt so isolated for so long, began to feel like part of a community again. They planned a simple wedding for midsummer, to be held under the large cottonwood tree near the creek. Emma wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered and freshened with new lace collar and cuffs. Damon purchased a new shirt and string tie and had his boots polished to a mirror shine. The day dawned clear and bright, the summer heat tempered by a gentle breeze. Neighbors arrived early, bringing food and flowers. The traveling preacher who served the scattered ranches and homesteads arrived promptly at noon, his Bible tucked under his arm. Standing beneath the spreading branches of the cottonwood, with Daniel beside him and the assembled community watching, Damon felt a moment of perfect clarity. As Emma walked toward him, radiant in the simple white dress with wildflowers woven into her hair, he knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Their vows were simple and heartfelt. They promised to cherish and protect each other, to build a life of purpose and meaning together, to face whatever challenges came their way as partners. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher announced, and as Damon's lips met Emma's, sealing their promise, the gathered neighbors erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration continued into the evening, with fiddle music and dancing in the yard, tables laden with food, and generous portions of Daniel's homemade apple brandy flowing freely. As twilight deepened into night, the newlyweds slipped away to the small cabin Damon and Daniel had built at the eastern edge of the property, giving them privacy while keeping them close to the main house and ranch operations. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn," Damon said softly as he carried Emma across the threshold. The cabin was simple but lovingly crafted, with a stone fireplace, sturdy furniture Damon had made by hand, and colorful quilts sewn by Emma and the neighboring women. A vase of wildflowers sat on the table beside a bottle of wine and 2 glasses Daniel's wedding gift. That night, in the privacy of their new home, they discovered each other fully for the first time. Their lovemaking was tender and unhurried, each touch and caress an exploration and a promise. Afterward, lying in each other's arms as moonlight spilled through the window, they spoke of the future they would build together. The years that followed brought both joy and challenge. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, expanding from the original 50 head of cattle to over 200. They added sheep, finding the wool brought good prices from the textile mills back east. Daniel, his leg healed but still carrying a slight limp, proved to have a talent for business, handling the contracts and sales that allowed them to reinvest in the property. A drought in the second year of their marriage tested their resilience, forcing them to drive the cattle far to find water and forage. Damon's knowledge of the territory proved invaluable, helping them locate hidden springs and sheltered valleys where the animals could survive until the rains returned. When Emma discovered she was with child during their 3rd year together, Damon's joy was tempered with fear. Childbirth in the territories was dangerous, with proper medical care often days away. He insisted on bringing a midwife from Prescott to live with them for the final 2 months of Emma's pregnancy, paying her handsomely for the extended stay. Their daughter, Sarah, was born on a cold December night with a howling wind rattling the windows. She entered the world with a lusty cry that immediately captured her father's heart. Holding his daughter for the first time, Damon experienced a love so overwhelming it brought tears to his eyes. "She has your eyes," Emma said tiredly, watching her husband cradle their newborn. "And your spirit, if that cry is anything to judge by," Damon replied with a grin. As Sarah grew, so did the ranch. They added a second story to the main house, built a larger barn, and dug a deeper well that ensured water even in the driest seasons. Daniel constructed a small house for himself nearer to the creek, giving the growing family more space while remaining close enough to be part of daily life. 2 years after Sarah's birth, Emma gave birth to twins, a boy they named Thomas, after the blacksmith whose murder had set Damon on his path to them, and a girl they called Rose for the wild roses that bloomed near their cabin. Life settled into a rhythm of seasons and growth. The children thrived in the freedom of ranch life, learning to ride almost as soon as they could walk. Sarah, the eldest, showed her mother's practicality and her father's steady determination. Thomas was quieter, with a gift for working with animals that made him invaluable during calving season even at a young age. Rose, despite being Thomas's twin, was his opposite, lively and talkative, with a curiosity that led her to explore every corner of the ranch. Damon never regretted giving up his badge or the life of a lawman. The satisfaction of building something lasting, of watching his children grow strong and confident, far outweighed the adrenaline of enforcing the law. Occasionally, he would be called upon to help the local marshal with particularly troublesome situations. His experience and steady hand with a gun still valuable in a territory where the law was spread thin. But he always returned home, hanging his gun belt on the peg by the door with a sense of relief and rightness. 10 years after Damon rode into that fateful gunfight, the Lawson Quinn Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the territory. The small community that had once been just scattered homesteads had grown into a proper settlement, with a schoolhouse built on land donated by Damon and Emma, a general store, and a small church. On the anniversary of their wedding, Damon took Emma back to the creek where he had proposed. The children were with Daniel for the day, giving them a rare moment of solitude. They sat on the same rock where they had sat a decade before, though now it was surrounded by a small garden Emma had planted over the years. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you hadn't come along that day?" Emma asked, leaning against Damon's shoulder. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I was so focused on revenge, on finding those men, if I'd been a day later or taken a different route." He tightened his arm around her. "I try not to think about it too much. I used to believe it was just luck," Emma said thoughtfully. "Now I think it might have been something more. Providence, maybe." Damon smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Whatever it was, I'm grateful for it every day." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the water flow over the stones. After a while, Emma spoke again. "I got a letter from Mrs. Henderson last week." Damon looked surprised. He had written to Sarah Henderson's sister after bringing the men who killed her family to justice, letting her know it was done. Over the years, Emma had maintained a correspondence with the woman, though Damon rarely spoke of that chapter of his life. "She's coming to visit," Emma continued. "She wants to meet the man who avenged her sister and the family he built afterward. I hope that's all right." Damon was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said finally. "I think that would be good, a way of connecting the past to the present, maybe finding some peace in it." "You've never really talked about whether you found the peace you were looking for," Emma observed. "After you caught them, I mean." Damon considered the question. "Not right away," he said honestly, "but the first time I held Sarah in my arms, I felt something heal inside me. Every time I watch our children play, every time I come home to you at the end of the day, that's where I found peace. Not in revenge, but in what came after." Emma turned in his arms, framing his face with her hands. The years had added lines around his eyes and threads of silver at his temples, but to her, he was more handsome than ever. "I love you, Damon Quinn," she said simply. "Thank you for riding into our lives that day." "I love you, Emma Quinn," he replied, covering her hands with his own. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stay." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the land they had nurtured together, They walked hand in hand back to the house where their children's laughter awaited them. The path they followed was well-worn now, a daily journey between the cabin where they had begun their life together and the main house where family gathered. In the distance, they could see Daniel chasing the children through the yard, his limp barely noticeable after all these years. Sarah, now 7, was helping her younger siblings climb the large oak tree Daniel had built a swing on. Thomas and Rose, 5 years old and inseparable despite their differences, shrieked with delight as their uncle pretended to be a bear hunting them. "Do you ever regret it?" Damon asked suddenly. Taking in a stranger with a gun and a grudge, Emma stopped, turning to face him fully. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "You rode into a gunfight to save my brother and carried both of us out alive, Daniel, physically, and me in every other way that matters." Damon's smile was tender as he bent to kiss her, a gesture as familiar and necessary as breathing after 10 years together. Behind them, the setting sun painted the Arizona sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, a fitting backdrop to the life they had built from danger and chance, courage and love. "Let's go home," he said when they parted, and together they walked toward the sound of their children's laughter, toward the future they continued to build day by day in this wild, beautiful land they both called home.